It's 10 o'clock. I think I have the majority. Welcome to the Overview Scrutiny Committee meeting of the 3rd of January. Before we commence proceedings, I'm sure we all heard of the sad news of Sue Prutton passing. So if we can, I'd like to just stand and take a minute's silence for Sue. Thank you very much. So we'll move to item 1 of the agenda for declarations of interest. On anybody? No declarations. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Riley and Councillor Karimi Guvanlu, and Councillor Karimi Guvanlu's substitute is Councillor Beadle.
Thank you. Next, we have the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny meeting held on the 15th and 22nd of November. Can I take those as read? Any amendments? Yep. Any matters arising? None? Thank you very much. Move to item 5, Chairman's announcement. I am extremely pleased to welcome to my right James Overy, who has recovered from his recent illness, and we welcome him back. Been sorely missed. Welcome back.
Thank you, Chairman. It's nice to be here.
Do we have any public speaking, James?
No public speaking.
Good. So we'll go to the Cabinet reports, and the first item is page 18 of the Cabinet, and that's the Greater Norwich Local Plan Gypsy and Traveller site. And
okay, I'll introduce the topic briefly. So you'll be aware that we've been working with our partners at Norwich and Norfolk County Council on the Greater Norwich Local Plan. We submitted the plan in July 2021, and the inspectors made it clear that they expected the local plan to include sites for gypsies and travellers. Since then, we've been working hard to identify sites, whether that be new land, privately owned land, or publicly owned land. To date, we've managed to identify a total of 10 favoured sites for consultation. We're aiming to run the consultation between the 30th of January and the 13th of March. You'll notice that in the papers it talks about our need for pictures and the timescales over which we will need those pictures. Our requirement is for a total of 53 pitches. For clarity, a pitch tends to be described as enough space for a gypsy and traveller family to have a tourer caravan, a static caravan, and then sort of space for vehicles, and what's often described as a day room, so sort of bathroom and kitchen type facilities. So of our need for 53 pitches, through the work we've done with our 10 favoured sites would give a potential for 62 pitches. It's worth saying that this is purely at the stage of consultation. So that will no doubt evolve as the consultation progresses and as more information comes forward. Of the sites, you'll notice that some are in Broadland and some are in South Norfolk. I can obviously discuss those with you in more detail as you wish, but you'll notice that we have Broadland sites at Eastgate and Corston, one to the north of Lingwood, near to the A47 improvements, an expansion of an existing site at Stratton Strawlers, again an expansion of an existing site at Folsham, and then the remaining sites are in South Norfolk. Chairman, is that enough of an introduction at this stage?
I think that is. I think most people will have read the papers. Any questions on? So I'll go with Sue and then Jan.
Thank you. I noticed that in the papers it says that Norwich agreed the Greater Norwich local plan, looking at some issues to do with the Gypsy and Traveller sites, then South Norfolk didn't. And then it says that Broadland didn't because South Norfolk didn't. Can we clarify why that was the case?
Thank you. So obviously every recommendation has to be reviewed by each authority, so each local planning authority. Because the report went to Norwich City Council first, the previous consultation and it was only 3 sites, went to Norwich, they agreed it. South Norfolk then didn't agree to carry on with the consultation, and Broadland then didn't consider the report. So it wasn't that they followed suit, they didn't then follow the report, it was deferred, or it was taken away from the agenda because obviously the consultation couldn't go ahead because of the fact that one of the councils had not agreed it.
Okay, so I still don't quite understand why Broadland didn't actually examine what was in there to see whether they would have been happy, and then that we could have clarified from there.
It didn't at the time. It didn't seem appropriate at the time by the chairman to continue with it because obviously the consultation couldn't go ahead anyway. So Broadland decided not to make a decision either way.
So my second question then is about, I understood it was to do with the site in Cossey. Could you clarify whether the site, you may say that in this report, but it's quite a long report, whether the site that's currently listed as Cossey in here, is that the same site that was originally in the previous sections?
So the Cossey site, which is described as the Cossey contingency site, is still mentioned in this report, but obviously we've managed to expand the choice of sites, so we're now not reliant on it, and that I think was the key point for South Norfolk, that they wanted to have a consultation where there was genuine choice. Since July, which is what you're referring to, we've been able to identify more sites, so this is a much wider and fuller consultation.
Yeah, if you go to page 23 and 24 in section 5.5, yeah.
Really is, so why does that make Cossey now a contingency as opposed to being one of the potential sites?
I see your point. So the Cossey contingency is described as that. Remember, the Cossey contingency site is for 800 homes. So it would only come forward if other housing sites didn't happen. And what the promoters of that site have said is that if the 800 homes, the need for 800 homes is triggered, then as part of that 800 homes, they could incorporate some Gypsy and Traveller pitches.
Then, so it was also a contingency in the previous thing as well. So that's not changed. We've just got a wider selection now.
That's correct. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Davies.
Yes, I'm just trying to clarify, I suppose, historically what happened as well, so that we know where we are now. So we knew that we weren't putting forward Gypsy and Traveller sites when the GNLP was submitted. Is that as I read it, and yet it was a requirement of the local plan?
We did an extensive piece of consultation work to gather all sites, whether it be gypsies and travellers and so forth. But prior to submitting the GNLP, we hadn't had any gypsy and traveller sites put forward. So we submitted the plan in the knowledge that during the examination process, we would have to do what we've done now, which is continue to find sites for gypsies and travellers.
Okay, so there was always going to be a delay to the plan because of that, essentially.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, fine, thank you. So, yeah, I note that the A47 site is the biggest allocation at 15 pictures. And if it wasn't able to go ahead, then that would blow quite a hole in terms of the number of pitches available. Yeah, so that's pretty critical, isn't it? And yet it's the one with the greatest risks as well. And I suggest that there's one risk that hasn't been included in there, which is that, and it hasn't been actually mentioned, that there is an ongoing legal challenge to that project, the dualling of the A47 there, which affects that pitch. And I suggest that that is a risk that ought to be acknowledged and recognised, and isn't at the moment. But it is the fact that this is 15 pitches out of 53, and there is a question about it going, whether it goes ahead. And even if it goes ahead, based on the risk assessment within the report, it seems to have the highest risk.
It's actually 15 out of 62. If you look at 5.5,
well,
62.
That includes the
which
contingency.
includes, no, there isn't. The contingency there was a reasonable alternative for another 10 sites in table 2, and then the contingency of 18 is in table 3. So there's actually 62 sites in table 1, of which, if you take the 15 out, that takes us below the 50, but then you've got the reasonable alternative in table 2.
Okay. It's still a significant number. It's the largest site, and therefore, it is significant, and it seems to have the highest risks.
Could I just add, for clarity, the planning guidance set by government requires us to find specific sites for the first 5 years. So our current requirement is for 31, and then we can look for what's described as broad locations beyond that. Also, in addition, we may get more sites come forward as part of this consultation, which we could then take into account. So I do accept your points about the risks of the site, but overall we have got more sites than we potentially need, and there is some scope for choice and for those sites to move around, and for the ultimate selection of sites to be different from what we're going to be consulting on.
Thank you. Was it on this, Stuart, or
It was on the previous point.
is it okay if I fetch Stuart in now and then we'll come back to you?
Yeah. Also on the historical background to this, and I'm a bit perturbed because my understanding of the interpretation I'm putting on what is being said, Chair, is that if South Norfolk hadn't have scuppered this lot, then Broadland was not in a position to do it either. So if South Norfolk hadn't scuppered it, the lack of action by this authority would also have scuppered it. Is that understanding correct?
No, I don't think so. I think we all had the papers and we were in a position to move forward, but it was because South Norfolk did not want to proceed with the consultation at that point. Then Broadland could not continue with the consultation because no one could continue with the consultation.
Just come in to clarify, because I was obviously part of the decision and made the decision with the chairman to pull the paper. The way that this works is everybody needs to be in agreement for it to progress to consultation, which I know you're aware of. It could have happened in any chain of events. So Norwich City are in the position whereby, well, they made a decision and now they can't progress, so they're paused. If Broadland had gone first, I don't know what Broadland's decision could have been. It could have been to go, it could have been to hold. And South Norfolk then said, no, we're not happy. Then we'd have still been where we are. It was simply timing of events. When those cabinet meetings were held, all three parties need to be in agreement. And part of this is because of the way that the Greater Norwich, I always get the acronyms wrong, so I won't use them, but the way Greater Norwich is set up, you get all of those parties together to kind of agree where you then go, but they don't make the decisions. The decisions have to go in to the respective cabinets or councils, and that's at the point whereby it then formally either can progress or not progress. So at any point in time, as officers working across those three, you hope that you've got all your ducks in a row and you know that everything's going to go, but it's until you get through that final decision and all three have to agree in the same way for it to be able to progress. So the reason for holding the Broadland paper was because there is nothing to consider at this point, because you have to go back to the drawing board.
I understand the process, Chair. But that's not the point. The point is, as I understand it, is that Broadland had not provided sufficient evidence on the travellers and gypsies and travellers potential sites for it to be accepted by the inspector anyway. And therefore, we were not in a position to fulfil the requirements laid down by government, and therefore it would have stopped anyway, even if South Norfolk had been in a position to agree it. Thank you.
I'll defer on that particular point because that point I'm not clear on.
I think we can't definitively answer that, because we're talking if, buts and maybes to some extent. So had all three authorities agreed to that consultation, we could have gone out to consultation. We only had enough pictures to actually meet the need at that time. So there was a vulnerability with that consultation, and all three local planning authorities are responsible for that consultation and sites coming forward. So we don't actually know whether that would have been successful or not. What we did know at that time, we only had the minimum number to consult on, and that was another concern that was raised. Actually, it looked like it was a decision had already been made because we need these sites and we've only got this number to consult on. The fact that we've actually since July gone away and actually gone out extensively to look for more sites to come forward, we have a choice to make our need, which is in a better position for all three local planning authorities. So that's where we are now. We've got more sites to consult on, more may come forward, and all three local planning authorities have gone back and gone out to look at finding more sites to come forward. So it's really difficult to categorically say whether just Broadland. I would say collectively we did not have enough sites to consult on.
Okay, if I can
I do love that phrase, vulnerability. So I believe my point is valid.
Thank you. Okay, I think the time frame we can finish with now. I think we've discussed that enough. Jan, I know you wanted to come back. Not on the time frame though.
Okay, no, it's the risk I mentioned. Now, I think a proper response, really, in terms of the fact that there is an ongoing legal challenge to the A47 project, and therefore that could impact on the availability of the 15 pitches in North Birmingham. And I just feel that needs to be recognised. I mean, that is a risk. Is that fair? As I understand it, we're pointing out issues that perhaps Cabinet need to consider, and that this should influence, at least they should be aware that this has been discussed at scrutiny.
I did take note of that point, and I think what we could do is in the consultation papers, we could add a line to explain that very point, that the delivery of the GNLP 5014, the Lingwood one, would be subject to the A47 dualling. The County Council's position, as you rightly point out, is that that land would only become surplus to farming when the road improvements have been made and effectively cut that land off from being practical to farm. So I think we can make that change to the consultation papers under the delegated authority that Helen would have under the cabinet recommendation.
Okay, I mean, I did make the point that health and education have been identified as key risks there. Air quality, clearly, because it's in the middle of basically a roundabout, and it just doesn't seem the most appropriate location. But anyway.
Okay, and Cabinet will receive the minutes from this meeting and therefore will take them forward from that. Sue Catchpole.
Thank you, Chair. My question really is, and it may be in the report, but I didn't see it, is has any research been done to suggest what the ideal number of pitches per site would be for gypsy and traveller sites? And if so, can you give us an idea of what that would be? And also, the in some of these proposed sites, lack of proximity to services like shops and things like that may be an issue. I wondered how much of a consideration that is. Thank you.
The question you raise is an interesting one. There is no magic number. Sometimes small is beautiful with gypsy and traveller sites, in that you can then cater for a family and extended family. So sometimes you see sites which are maybe only 2 or 3 pitches. Other times pitches can be much bigger and still work perfectly well in terms of their functionality and their management and their success as a home to people. So the Swanton road site at Mile Crossing, Norwich is going to grow to over 30 pitches. So there is no magic figure. Some sites are privately owned, some are publicly managed. Your point about access to services, I think, is a legitimate one. So one of the criteria we looked at was access to services. That is quite a challenging area, and I think just because of the way the land market works, it's difficult to often find gypsy and traveller sites in what I describe as prime locations. What we have done with this consultation is look at sites which can be expanded on the basis that if gypsy and traveller families are already successfully living in that location, then it, obviously is suitable. So a couple of the Broadland examples at Stratton Strawlers and Folsham would be examples of that. I think it is fair to say that we did have to cast the net slightly wider in terms of gypsy and traveller sites, because simply up until this report, we didn't have the luxury of sites to choose from. And I think the planning inspectors are aware of that as well.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Sure.
Stuart.
In my travels, I noticed that on the NDR, particularly on the Reefham Road, Taveram side of the NDR, there's an occasional traveller there. Do we actually follow up these informal sites as to whether they can be made formal or indeed suitable to be made formal?
Yeah, one of the benefits of the work we've recently done has been to work with the Norfolk and Suffolk Roma Traveller Service. So they've got a good handle on where the families are, where they're travelling to, where they want to be. Myself and other colleagues have also worked with our enforcement team. So we've got a good knowledge of where people are. Obviously, this is a group of society who we don't necessarily always have the most regular and frequent contact with, but we're looking to sort of strengthen those lines of communications. And I am quite pleased by the response we've had from the Gypsy and Traveller community over the last couple of months, where we have had them come forward and say, yeah, I would like to expand my existing site. So it's not as good as we'd want it to be, but I think it's getting better.
Thank you. Any more questions? If not, we'll go to, oh, Sue.
It was just to do with the delegated authority to the Assistant Director of Planning in consultation with the Leader and Portfolio Holder of Planning. The consultation documentation, will that be seen by anybody else prior to it being approved anyway? I mean, I'm not suggesting we need to have a finger in the pie, as it were, but, you know, it would be nice to know whether we would be able to have some vision of it before it actually went to consultation.
Yeah, I think it's very unlikely, other than Cabinet agreeing to probably the additional risk that's been mentioned today, that it would actually change. It's just those minor changes that might be added to. I think it's nearly there to go out to consultation. We wouldn't be bringing any more sites into the consultation paper because there's an opportunity to put further sites in through the consultation, which could be us as a local authority putting sites forward to be considered. So I don't expect it to change radically to what you've seen already, other than any recommendations that have made today and at policy committee tomorrow, before it goes on to cabinet for them to agree any changes. I would expect those to be minor changes. We wouldn't normally do that as a recommendation because you know, they would only be sort of in my opinion, significant changes that's already been agreed. And I think the consultation is basically there. It's just obviously going through all the different local authorities committees. So certainly we can give you early sight of the, you know, let you know when it goes on the website prior to the 30th of January. What we have done is actually been in contact, the local plan team, with all local members who've got sites coming forward. So there's no surprises before this report was published. So we are obviously keeping everybody in the loop.
I think as well, just to provide confirmation and say what Helen said, the delegation is purely any tidy up or minor. It's not going to fundamentally change. It is the risk potentially that Councillor Davies has put forward, an inclusion of that I can't see there being anything other than that.
Yeah, I think because this report is basically there as a live document to go to the consultation, there won't be hardly any changes. I don't foresee any other than those, you know, very minor changes that may or may not be agreed. And obviously we will know that from Cabinet when they endorse it. So
Yeah. Okay. If there are no further questions, I'll take us to page 28 and recommendations. Recommendation 10.1 and 10.2. I'll take them as read. All those in favour?
Carried, Chairman. That's 8 members.
Yep. Against? Abstention? 1.
8 abstentions. Carried.
Thank you. I'll now take us to the item 9, and that's page 442 of the Cabinet Papers. Helen, you're...
thank you, Chair. I'll just give you a quick overview, which hopefully the report is self-explanatory. So obviously the report is to establish and enter into a joint venture to deliver a programme of mitigation for nutrients neutrality. Just a very brief recap on that. Applications for overnight accommodation are on hold due to nutrients neutrality constraints imposed by Natural England back in March. This relates to the River Wensum and Broads Authority special areas of conservation. So this report details how the setting up of a joint venture, which would be with Anglian Water, North Norfolk District Council, Norwich City Council, Broadland and South Norfolk and Breckland. And it would be setting up this joint venture, which is the full terms of that are detailed in Appendix 1. It all details actually what will be set up as actually developers being able to buy credits from this joint venture to be able to address their nutrients neutrality issues as part of their planning applications. So it would be a range of credits that will be available. And initially this focus would be on nutrients neutralities, but it could expand in the future to other environmental credits, for example, green infrastructure and biodiversity net gain. So how is this going to be funded? It's proposed to use initially 150,000 from the Environmental Projects Reserve, which will be a loan which will be fully repaid from the joint venture, including interest. But for budgets onwards of 23-24, there will be a 30,000 requirement per authority within the joint venture. As I said, this is really key to actually unlocking a lot of our planning permissions on hold for those smaller developers. Those of if you have been made aware of the nutrients neutrality update, there will be a requirement for Natural England to provide credits, but this would be available to those smaller developers to come forward and purchase credits from this joint venture and those local authorities and Anglian Water to help move their applications forward. If you have any other questions, then obviously I'll do my best to answer those.
Thank you. Councillor Nurdon.
Thank you, Chairman. Looking at paragraph 3.5, Natural England recently provided an update on progress with their credit-based system. However, there is no mitigation identified in Norfolk at this stage, and therefore no credits available. They are still looking for potential solutions with the aim of providing credit by the end of March 2023. We're going ahead and we're going to establish this thing, but we don't know whether these people might be buying credits and spending a lot of money on buying those credits, but there might not be. Okay, so you buy a credit, and the debit on the other side is what Natural England are providing. Okay, so that's, you buy the credit, and the credit is passed over to the debit on the other side. What happens in the instance where there's not enough debits to put against those credits? That's what I'm saying is, developers will be buying all these credits, but there's not enough mitigations to go against those credits. That's the concern that I have with regards to the scheme. I think I almost want to say we're putting the cart before the horse.
Yeah.
And establishing this thing without knowing what the pot of debits is to offset against these credits for nutrient neutrality.
Clearly there is that due diligence that as the joint venture, we will have to make sure we have the mitigation to be able to deliver the credits that are available. So to begin with, we won't probably have that many credits available because we won't have that many mitigation schemes coming forward within our joint venture. So I think it's really important that obviously we try and kickstart this as soon as possible to release some permissions, some of those smaller scale permissions, with those mitigation measures we will have within our joint venture and those that we are working towards. But there will be that importance of actually making sure you are only selling the credits for the mitigation that is coming forward. With respect to Natural England, which you referred to initially, they were never going to provide all the credits for all the mitigation that's needed in the Norfolk catchment areas. So there has to be other measures. Other measures will be a lot of our large-scale developers will come up with their own wetland schemes, and we know that's happening for a number of Broadland applications as we speak. So they're coming forward with their own solution. So there'll be the Natural England solutions coming forward. Clearly, they can't sell their credits yet until they have their mitigations identified, or at least the land identified to provide that. So yes, there is that risk associated with that, but we will have to do our due diligence and make sure we only sell the credits for what the mitigations we have coming forward.
Councillor Davies, Councillor Catchpole.
Thank you very much, and thanks very much for the report and the detail. Can I just clarify that last point in terms of credits are only applicable, as I understand it, in the operational area to which a development is situated. Is that correct? And therefore, it's quite limited in terms of the geographical area that a credit would be appropriate for.
That's right. The mitigation has to be within the catchment area.
So, it is a critical thing, and it's whether sufficient credits can be actually identified within an operational area. I've got a number of questions, I'm afraid, but just the first one in terms of a general point. In the purpose of the reports on page 442 of the papers, it's the third paragraph says the joint venture would be established with the potential to provide a range of environmental credits, initially focusing on nutrient neutrality. And the report does mention the other environmental credits and carbon offset, biodiversity net gain, and so on later on. So we understand what that is. Can I just clarify that this is environmental credits in relation to housing development alone?
Well, the restriction us releasing planning permissions is on overnight accommodation. There are some non-residential that schemes that are caught up in that, but initially we're focusing it on housing. So nutrients neutrality can be captured by other types of development, but the main focus is on overnight accommodation. So housing.
Okay, but there's the potential for this joint venture to, and it's not clear within the paper, to offer environmental credits beyond direct overnight accommodation, unless it specifically says here that we are talking about housing developments. And I'm just anticipating how this might evolve and develop over time if we're not clear that actually this is about, because the importance here is about allowing housing development to go ahead. And I'm not sure that it clearly identifies that. Or am I being a bit unfair there?
I think there are very few other applications that are caught up at the moment other than the housing and the overnight accommodation. And clearly our credits are going to be available initially for that overnight accommodation relating to nutrients neutrality. That is the focus of setting up the joint venture. The joint venture, to say other environmental credits, is there to be able to build on that joint venture in the future, but initially it is just as outlaid in the report, and any other sort of, I would have thought, growth of that joint venture would have to come back to be agreed.
Okay, so any further development of the joint venture would have to come back for agreement. I think that's what we're saying here.
Yeah, I mean, I think, excuse me, what you've got in the report is how it is deemed to work at the moment and what we think it needs to cover at the moment. Any substantial change that will, of course, need to come back through because it's a change in change in governance. So that would need to be reviewed at that point in time. But I think what the report is trying to do is future-proof us as best we can with the knowledge that we've got at the moment to enable and unlock that housing development as its principal aim.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I ask another? Is that okay? Oh, sorry. Okay.
Well, I've got Sue Catchpole and now
Okay.
I've got Sue Holland. But...
So Natural England has said that they'll focus on the nature and land-based solutions. But this council is saying that it's not recommended as a way forward for this council, which then leaves, I'm not quite sure, can we clarify what other solutions we're talking about here? I do have an idea, but it could be unfortunate for biodiversity if we're not focusing on nature and land-based solutions.
We are looking at the short-term solutions, as the report says, so they could be things like, we haven't got all of those listed or looked at in detail, and looking at obviously the cost of those and how they'd be delivered, but obviously work is still working in parallel to look at those. But they could be things like cover crops, they could be like taking where land has gone out of use and a solar farm has come in, taking that agricultural land out because of that. So we'll be looking at the short-term mitigation measures coming forward, which will all, in my opinion, have an environmental benefit, clearly, whether it's related to nutrients neutrality or not. But we will be focusing in the joint venture on those short-term mitigation. So they're still being worked up. We haven't detailed those deliberately in this report. This report is about setting up the joint venture.
Okay, so a concern would be that we're talking about on-site, basically on-site sewage treatment within small-scale developments, which could mean that we're getting, we then build up quite a number of privately run, sewage treatment works, which is going to be a nightmare in the long term in terms of overall management. And I wouldn't want to see us promoting that kind of solution. But I can see that developers might come forward with those proposals. And so it's just flagging up now that, we need to be, I would have thought, concerned about that way forward.
Okay, I'll go to Sue Catchpole.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, that kind of overlaps with what I was going to ask is, if the problem is that there's too much phosphate nitrate in the waterways, that's the Wensum and Broads, then how do the mitigations that are proposed actually reduce that? I'm just really confused that we're not, by doing things like offsetting, we're not actually tackling the problem.
That is a good point, but what we should ensure that is no new development actually increases that impact on the current, if you like, ground. So that's why you have offsetting to mitigate against any additional impact there may be. So you're offsetting that to ensure actually what you're creating with new developments is neutral impact. So what would have been created by that development, that nitrate or that phosphate impact, is not added to the ground because you have mitigated against that through the mitigation measures.
I see. So is any work being done by a different agency on actually reducing the phosphate nitrate levels in the waterways in the first place?
I mean, obviously the developer industry is being hit by this as a result of the Natural England identifying our areas within the Wensum and the Broads Authority having unacceptable levels. So any development that we now permit for overnight accommodation should not add to that. Clearly, those members who went to our training on that, the biggest polluter of this is some of the agricultural methods that are already being used. We are not here to address that, but clearly the Environment Agency, DEFRA, are working with other bodies who have other impacts. But for us, it's actually unlocking development that doesn't add to the problem of our special conservation areas, and we need mitigation in place to do that. So we can only concentrate on that element of it. But yes, there's lots of other factors that are having a greater impact than the developer industry. But obviously we now have a duty to make sure lawfully that we don't permit any new development that's going to add to the existing problem.
A separate issue, but another question on the report is, what impact will the fee for the credit have on the percentage of affordable housing that is planned for each larger development site?
Yeah, indirectly, I mean, obviously this report isn't considering how we then deal with planning applications, but clearly the more cost of a developer on their proposals will affect their viability. And the viability impact that we know exists, the thing that can actually be lowered is affordable housing. So quite clearly that could impact on developments coming forward if they're not being viable. We know some schemes are coming forward that will still demonstrate they're viable, but others with other already on-site constraints will have an impact because they will be having to pay an additional credit or some towards their developer costs. So there will be an impact potentially, but I don't think for this purpose that we can possibly go into that detail, because ultimately this is something that a developer who is promoting overnight accommodation needs to address, and there is an additional cost for them to do that, whether it's an on-site mitigation or buying a credit.
Thanks. So you're saying it could have an impact on that percentage?
Yeah, and I think the report does make reference to that, but it doesn't, we aren't referring to that. We're saying that it affects the viability. The viability could be lots of things, not just affordable housing. So it's just not about that. But we don't know the direct impacts of that until we have the schemes come forward and how that impacts on viability or not.
So is there nothing that the council could do to change the formula so that the percentage of affordable housing is retained as far as possible?
It's probably not for this report or for us to consider at this
Okay.
time. It would be for us considering each planning application on its own merits when it comes forward in light of our current local plan policy. So I don't think it's one for this report. What we're making reference to is obviously there is a developer cost. Viability will be looked at again, and there may be no impact or there may be some impact. We don't know that. And that will be considered through the planning process, not part of what our recommendation is today.
Thank you.
Okay,
Councillor Holland.
thank you. Sorry, just one last point on the report. Under 4.6, it says it's expected that other commercial providers will also enter the nutrient neutrality market in due course. Should there be a comma after other, or are we now a commercial provider as a district council?
Obviously, we will be a provider. It's not part of the planning process. This is separate to the planning process. So we will be entering a joint venture to sell credits to developers outside of the planning process. So we will be one of those providers.
As part of the joint venture, though, not singularly. Councillor Holland.
Thank you. Yes, my question is relating to the heads of terms and this 150,000, because the initial funding, it says on your page 454 here, initial seed funding of 150,000 via a loan to be sourced potentially from a single local authority. So I'm assuming Broadland is that single local authority. When you actually trot down the page a little bit and onto the next page, it talks about what would happen, repayment conditional on the joint venture company having sufficient funds. There's no interest, and events of default. If it cannot be paid in year one, repayment will be sought in future years. If it cannot be repaid, the money would be written off. Now, I'm not entirely sure that I'm happy that Broadland subsidises £150,000 worth of funding, unless I've misread it. Why is it not being split across all the councils that are involved?
I think initially we want to get this up and running by March, and this was a proposal to get this up and running as soon as possible, with subsequent running costs being met by each authority. So the 30,000 per authority as requested in the report, plus the 150 by Anglian Water. To forward fund and seed this fund early to get all the resources in place, is proposed that we do that by one authority, and it's recommended that Broadland does use it reserve. I think there is a risk, a very small risk, but it's an incredibly small risk for that loan not to be paid. So I think that's why it is being recommended that we use the funds as suggested in the report, because I think it is a very small risk that it won't be repaid.
Thank you. Can I fetch
Yeah,
Emma in?
can I just supplementary to
Just
that?
quickly fetch Emma in.
It was just on the point of this, just to try and give you some assurance on that point. The Section 151 officer has been involved. All of them across the council have been involved in putting together this heads of terms, so all are comfortable with it. The Section 151 officer here has said he is comfortable with that use of money, otherwise it wouldn't be in front of you. I absolutely recognise it's a risk. I do think the risk is small when you're in the local government family. It's an extremely small risk, but you know, it is a risk, but it is a small one within the local government family.
Yes, well, I do take the point that it's a small risk, but that being the case, and the fact that there are 5 authorities involved, I can't see why there's any restriction on each authority putting in a share for this initial funding, rather than Broadland, putting the whole lot. I don't understand the mechanisms for that. I mean, I'm sure the other S151 officers are thrilled to bits, but I just feel that there's no reason why all the authorities could not just put in their share of it, frankly.
Councillor Nedden.
Yeah, thank you. I agree 100% with what Councillor Holland is saying, and I'm just wondering whether it's possible that we can put through an amendment to a recommendation and say that 150,000 loan should be split between maybe Norwich City, South Norfolk, and Broadland, being the Greater Norwich Growth Board's potential members, whereas North Norfolk and Breckland are pretty much outside of the main areas. Well, I know North Norfolk is also very much in the Broads, but yeah.
Would you like that to be put forward as an alternative recommendation to come? Councillor Nurden seconded. Okay.
All 5 councils.
All. And sorry, excluding Anglian Water, just to be clear.
Confirm Anglian Water putting in, yeah, we need 300,000 to start the joint venture before March, of which 150k is being proposed to come from a loan from Broadland District Council with 150 from Anglian Water. Subsequent years, it will be 30k per authority with 150 coming from Anglian Water.
Okay, and that's been seconded by Councillor Beaton.
Just to say, Chairman, we're assured that it's a minimal risk. If it's a minimal risk for us, it's a minimal risk for them all. So why shouldn't they do it?
Okay. And Councillor Legge.
If we did, would that put a limit on what was suggested that Broadland is anxious to try and get moving? I just wondered if that would put a limit on that, or will that be overridden by what is proposed?
I think because it would have to go before each council's.
It would delay the setting up of the joint venture, which we're keen to obviously get set up by March, which is why we're proposing to do it this way, because it's a quicker way to get the joint venture up and running by March, beginning of April, so we can actually start to do credit. So it has been obviously looked at informally by all the authorities. We're trying to move it as quickly as possible. Budget setting is key, clearly, and obviously we're already within the budget. So actually doing it this way, whereby there was an opportunity for one of the authorities to take a loan from, was to bring it forward, was the way it's recommended. So that's the reason to do it. It would delay and probably not get the joint venture up and setting, because they are considering similar reports to this one today, where they are looking only for next year's budget for their sum. It is a risk, but as I said, I think it's a very small risk, and we do want to get this up and running and lead on this where we can.
Okay, I'm just going to fetch Emma in as well.
Yeah, I'm just the wonder of communication. I'm just emailing Section 151 officer just to get some things from him. He's saying this is an option that's been put forward to every council to consider. So that 150k up front, every council's getting this same report. And is there an appetite from any of the councils? So South Norfolk will be asked the same question. Norwich City will be asked the same question. So therefore it's been put in. Yeah, no, absolutely. So you can put that forward as an alternative recommendation. I think the point that Helen is making is that if it's just one council, it expedites it through and makes it a lot quicker, balanced against, the other councils funding it together. So I think either or option can work, and you can obviously put that forward as an alternative recommendation as your preference.
My only other suggestion would be that if that weren't the case, where it's talking about the repayment, were we to go forward and do it ourselves, where it's talking about if it cannot be repaid in future years, but then I would suggest that the other councils should be repaying Broadland regardless. I don't think if the joint venture company cannot afford to pay the 150,000 back to Broadland, then that loss should be shared between the councils if that's the way we were going.
Okay. Councillor Pete Bullman, sorry.
I don't usually forget my name. If it's possible that the Cabinet in its infinite wisdom rejects our proposal, which is unlikely, I know, but possible, can we put forward a further proposition that says in the Cabinet's decision to go with this proposal, can we have letters of undertaking from all of the councils involved that they will actually commit to repaying their element of the loan? That shouldn't be too difficult to achieve. So that would be my suggested fallback position.
So let me just take some advice. Okay, so just very nearly. Yes, I think what we need to do is look, as you say, and therefore in the heads of terms, have the amendment in the heads of terms so that in the event of failure that it is repaid by all councils. Everyone happy with that? Yep.
Can we just check James is clear on what he's got? Are you happy with what you've got, James?
So that's an additional recommendation. Would that be?
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think if shall I?
So it's under the heads of terms and for item 11, the bit where it says about the loan, if the loan cannot be repaid and the money will be written off, that is amended to that the money would be repaid jointly by each council. Yeah.
In the event.
Yeah.
In the event that it couldn't be repaid.
Yeah.
So I think it's twofold. If I can assist, I think your recommendation you're put forward to Broadland is that Broadland Cabinet is your preference is that front funding of 150k is paid for 30k each by authority. In the event that Cabinet don't wish to do that and wish to front fund it for expedient purposes, you wish to make sure that the heads of terms clarify that should the joint venture not work, that amount is paid back to Broadland by each local authority. I think you put it in with the heads of terms to make it really clear in the heads of terms.
Yeah. If it's in the heads of terms, in item 11 in the heads of terms. Okay, so all those in favour? I think that's unanimous. James.
No, that's unanimous, Chairman.
Sue?
Oh, completely different matter. Oh, first thing was to say that the 150,000 I understood was coming from the environmental reserve. Is that right? And I have requested in the past and continue to request that some of that is allocated as grant funding to local community projects for environmental purposes, and that's been very slow to come forward. So when I read this and saw that the 150 was going to be loaned into this commercial thing, it was disappointing.
Okay. Can I ask you to take that up with the portfolio holder separately outside of this meeting? Thank you.
Sue, your microphone's come on. No, that we were just doing the proposed recommendation.
That's it, lovely, thank you. 7.7 on page 449. Could somebody please explain what that paragraph means? Because I tried to understand who would be running this joint venture, and I couldn't understand it properly. Thank you.
So the joint venture will be run by a member of directors from each local authority. So Broadland, each authority would have a director or nominee on the joint venture together with Anglian Water.
So they're the paid staff directors,
Yes.
not member?
Not member directors, it's member directors from each of the authorities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of things on those that long memorandum thing after the initial one. I'm looking on page 457. It's reserved matters 20. It talks about decisions requiring consent of the majority of members. It talks about employing anyone whose salary is greater than £50,000. So we're looking at employee costs. I'm pretty concerned about the what is envisaged with employing a whole lot of people and with salaries of 50,000 or more, whatever. Just thinking back to the Norfolk Waste, the news company, the joint venture company. That's the first one. So what do you mean by all of those employees? And then I'm looking at 26 on 458. Members will be provided with monthly management accounts. Is that going to be the member councils, or is that going to be just the person who's the director when you talk about members? So will we as members be seeing those accounts? And then I'm going on to number 29, which is on page 459. A member will be terminated in the following circumstances. And the first one is persistent stroke material of the members' agreement and or articles of sale. I don't know what they're talking about, persistent or material. I don't know what is that, persistent what, of the members' agreement and or articles of association. So I don't know. Please clarify. So those are just three of the paragraphs of that big document that I just wanted to pick out. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll endeavour to answer those. I wasn't the author of the report, although I have been cited to the appendices. So each member director will be an existing employee. It's not an additional. There will be some resources dedicated to the operational running of the joint venture, but the members within the joint venture will actually be existing employees of an authority. So there won't be additional costs, if that answers that question. So, for example, there will be, for Broadland and South Norfolk, there will be myself and Phil Corte representing each authority.
So will that be a recharge of your costs? Or I don't know, when they talk about, because the company will have its own employees, is what I understood by paragraph 20 to be, that they will have staff, just like News has its own staff that they pay. I was pleased to see that the directors will not be paid, so that's fine. But I'm just concerned that this joint venture company is going to be employing staff, and potentially there's going to be staff that are going to be earning more than 50,000. They're not going to be employees of the councils, they're going to be employees of this joint venture company. So if they're employed by the council and they're employed by the joint venture company, then they're going to be earning two salaries. And that's where I'm a little concerned about when you talk about employing staff. So it's going to have costs besides the contracts that are going to be awarded to organizations.
I think Emma's going to pick that up point.
What's going on? Okay, great New Year gremlins. My understanding, and I think probably me and Helen will be closing the gaps between us, and it's probably better to get Phil to do a written response to you on this one because he's been so heavily involved. My understanding is that the joint venture will not be employing anybody. That's not what that's been set up to do. It's been set up to unlock nutrient neutrality, but absolutely Helen will need to be involved. Phil will need to be involved. That won't be at a cost. There won't be a payment for that. That's just part of unlocking the housing development. But I think rather than run myself into a road that I'm not overly clear on, I think I'll get Phil to do a written response on that just to make sure that we're clarifying that correctly. Did you want to do the same on the other points, Helen?
I think it might
Phil's
be
been
because
closer.
the latter one I wouldn't be able to answer from you in the terms of the heads of terms, other than to say obviously we have been guided by solicitors, Burkitt's, who are acting on our behalf to make sure all the clauses within the heads of terms are legally correct. So some of those will be legal terms that I'm not familiar with, but obviously are a requirement that we would need to make sure is covered within the heads of terms. So how some of that has been wording, especially your latter point.
Good. We'll go. Yeah. Councillor Holland.
It is actually just about that point, because I think where it says persistent stroke material of the members' agreement, it strikes me, I'm not a lawyer, and I believe this has been drawn up by lawyers, but it does strike me there's a word missing, because it's, so I think that's what the problem is.
I think there's a word missing, but we'd be probably guessing what the word was. So on all three of those, I'll get the director to do a written response for you.
Good. So I think any more questions before we go to okay, Councillor Catchpole and Councillor Davies.
One last point under 7.15, the equality implications. I just wondered whether as the credits will increase house prices, which presumably would also increase rents, that there would be an impact on low-income households. Is that something that should be highlighted here?
But this is just a facilitator. It's not actually creating anything additional that would come from it. So I don't think that's Helen, am I in the right ballpark?
I wouldn't have thought so, because this is about setting up a joint venture to deal with nutrients neutrality, environmental credits, isn't it? Not looking at what house prices or the cost of development will necessarily be. It's about actually setting up the joint venture to deal with selling environmental credits.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Yeah, just a quick one, and hopefully a bit more optimistic in terms of page 444, paragraph 2.3 in the background. You say that some planning applications have actually been released, and just thinking about, so there must have been solutions identified. Do you know what kind of solutions were identified there? And is that a pointer to future options or solutions? That's paragraph 2.3, the last sentence. Some of these applications have now been released. If I'm reading that correctly, is that they've gone ahead?
Where originally they were all on hold, some of them have been released in accordance with the guidelines. So everything went on hold initially, but as we worked through what could be released relating to discharge of conditions relating to a previous permission, some of them have been released. For Broadland, we've got about 77 applications still on hold at the moment, which equates to about 2,635 dwellings. It includes some of those large-scale ones. So at the moment, we have got a number on hold, but we have been looking to release some where they've come up with their own measures, or the maps and the credits, not the credits, but the impacts have showed that actually they could be released, but that has been very few. So,
Thank you. Can I take us to the recommendations on page 451? I think we can take 1, 2, 3, and 5 on block, and then 4, we've got the amended. Everyone happy with that? So, I thought the seed funding was separate. The seed funding was the 30,000. So that's not the loan.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. So section 5 is the seed funding of the 30,000, whereas section 4 is
for the seed funding.
For the seed funding.
For that, just the seed fund. Sorry, microphone. For the seed funding. So number 5 is around the 30,000 seed fundings. Forget the upfront bit. That's that, and how that's then repaid back. And number 4 is the upfront mechanism, the upfront payment. Apologies.
So for take 1, 2, 3, and 5, all those in favour?
1, 2, 3.
That's unanimous.
That's unanimous.
Thank you. And then 4
Number
is
4
the
as
amended. Section 4 is amended. All those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4.
That's unanimous again.
Unanimous.
Okay, so it's 11:10. Does anyone need to take a break? That's apparently unanimous. And we have Nick, who's going to present it.
Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. Thank you. I'll keep this tolerably brief if you are happy, and I can answer any questions that I can. So this report presents for consideration and adoption by Cabinet a table of fares and associated consultation responses in relation to Hackney carriages. Just a few points of introduction. While the Council doesn't currently have any licensed Hackney carriages, there is absolutely every prospect that an operator or an individual trader could come along who wishes to be licensed. So the intention is to put arrangements in place for that. The Council has in place a Hackney carriage and private hire vehicle policy and a conditions document. And one condition in that document requires that Hackney carriages that are licensed are fitted with a taxi meter. So the purpose then of this report is to propose the introduction of a table of fares to ensure compliance with the previously adopted policy. Just a couple of further points to make to you. So whilst we don't currently have any Hackney carriage vehicles, that could come. And in practice, the overwhelming majority of local authorities do have tables of fares that have been introduced. So this brings Broadland into line with other authorities, and it's in conformity with the policy that we hold. Now, the summary of consultation responses is provided at paragraph 3.10 of the report. That doesn't include any responses originating from within the Broadland area, but since a parallel consultation has been conducted in South Norfolk, we have presented for your information that set of responses at Appendix 2. And Appendix 1 contains the proposed table of fares. So going to the recommendations, of which there are 3, the recommendations are for Cabinet to consider the draft table of fares document, to consider the responses to the consultation exercise and any consequent proposed amendments to the draft table of fares, and to agree the proposed table of fares for their adoption with a view to the agreed fares taking effect from 1st of April 2023 or as soon as possible thereafter, because garages will need to be involved in the fitting of any meters. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Councillor Holland.
Just one quick question. This person who said, could the rates be in line with Broadland Council, is there a reason why they're not, and were they going to be aligned with them?
Unfortunately, our senior manager for covering licensing is unwell today and unable to be here, and they have a bit more command over the detail. I might have to get an answer to you, but I understand that the table of fares that's proposed is very broadly in line with Broadland and Great Yarmouth as well.
Any further questions? No. If I can take us to recommendations on page 467, take all 3 on block. All those in favour? It's unanimous. Thank you very much. Sorry, I'll now go to item 12, the exclusion of press and public. That the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the remaining items of business because otherwise information which is exempt information by virtue of paragraph 3 of part 1 of schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended by the Local Government Access to Information Variation Order 2006 would be disclosed to them. I so move.